Pairing.
Are we up? Are we
Meeting
down?
are starting. Live stream on YouTube.
Setting up.
Uh,
Woo! We are live.
Woo!
Yep.
Hey!
Hey. Great.
So,
Yeah, Nisha, who are we? What are we? When or where are we?
Unlicensed. We are unlicensed oral arts. We are a collective of deranged storytellers who are currently also shut-ins. We are various points of the globe, moment north, south, east, south, all places, but mostly in Ireland.
Nisha, you seem to have
And-
frozen. Oh, there you are.
You
Never
did
mind.
say it was very cold.
Yeah.
It is freezing in the north.
Oh,
Oh.
Yeah.
Live, are we back?
I believe so.
Yep.
Excellent. So what are we doing this time?
I don't know. You were introducing us. And he's frozen.
Yeah.
See, I
So,
had given a fantastic intro that the National Security Agency has decided to censor because it's too arousing, so I have to do something a bit safer. We're unlicensed oral arts. We put on YouTube, Twitter, probably Facebook, but no one uses Facebook anymore, so don't look for us there. And we are a storytelling collective specializing in whatever we want to touch upon. This week, I am doing some death-related stories because I still haven't gotten over Samhain from last month, and I believe some others are doing some similar things.
Yeah, I'm doing
Emily?
I'm doing some stories.
yeah, I'm doing one death story and one it shouldn't be alive, but it is story.
The best type.
Always good.
Didn't I do one of those on Samhain?
You did.
Oh no.
Yeah. Do we need to make
Baby.
any warnings about creatures like baby?
Oh, we should give the warnings. We, while not being past the watershed, are not a very safe group of storytellers. We are definitely not for children. Not that we
Or
don't like
not in
children.
this
we
context.
adore them. Not
I
in
like
this
children.
context.
With some roast
It's-
parsnips and lovely bottle of white. I mean, they cook up real nice.
We
And
do
I
sometimes
personally
do-
have no problem with the kids listening to any filth that we may spew, but that's going to be on you if you let them listen.
We've discovered that when the four of us get together, filth happens.
And Emily gets sad.
Just
Yeah.
some of the things that end up coming out of this conversation.
Yeah, I like to refer to it as Emily puts on the face.
So keep a lookout for the Emily face.
Mhm.
All right, let's see if I end up making the face.
Yes, because to kick things off with one of my favorite figures from Greek mythology, Sisyphus. So Sisyphus was the king of Corinth out in Greece. He'd taken control of the kingdom by usurping it from his brother. He seduced his niece, got her pregnant with twins, then convinced her to kill the children, at which point he framed his brother for both incest and child murder. So I tell you this anecdote because it's a whole other story, but now you know everything you need to know about Sisyphus. He's a classy guy who gets what he wants. Sisyphus used to invite rich guests to stay at his house, and he'd then murder them and rob them in their sleep, which obviously shat all over the rules of hospitality, which did piss off the gods. His incest, his murdering of house guests, but they decided to leave him alone because the gods are nothing if not apathetic. Until, as these things usually happen, Zeus got horny. Zeus decided to abduct a water nymph called Aegina, who's famous for that island, and being the daughter of Sisyphus. Sisyphus was a minor water deity who, for some reason, was not particularly comfortable with his little girl being defiled by the god of thunder. So he decided to try and track them down. He followed their path until he lost them just outside the city of Corinth. He then went in to meet with the king of Corinth, Sisyphus, to ask him if he'd seen which way Zeus and Aegina had gone. And Sisyphus sighed. I might have seen them, he said, but I really couldn't be sure. I've just got so much on my mind at the moment. What with all the redecorating? Redecorating? Sisyphus asked. Well, Sisyphus nodded. Indeed. I mean, have you seen the Acropolis? It is horrendous, a total eyesore, and affront to the senses. You must understand how difficult it is to get anything done with the Acropolis the way it is. Now, if there were, say, a nice scenic water feature right in the middle of the Acropolis, well, then we might be actually able to get some stuff done, and that would definitely solve our water shortage as well. Sisyphus raised an eyebrow. Water feature, you say? And Sisyphus smiled. One quick water feature magicked up later. Sisyphus was back on the trail of Zeus and Aegina, and Sisyphus was enjoying the now clean qi and feng shui in his Acropolis. Now, I probably don't have to tell any of you this, but cock-blocking Zeus is rarely a good idea. With balls bluer than the Aegean Sea, Zeus summoned Thanatos, tossed him a magical chain, and ordered him to drag Sisyphus to Tartarus. If Sisyphus was surprised when he opened the door to the literal personification of death, he didn't show it. Your time has come, mortal, Thanatos boomed. You must come with me. He then shook the chains for effect. And Sisyphus just let out a really heavy sigh. That's that then. As the saying goes, you come for us all. I guess I'd get it just a... I say, are those adamantium chains? Oh my gosh, they are gorgeous. Where did you get them? Oh my Zeus, are you going to put them on me? I'm so excited, practically giddy. Hey, could I just have a quick look at them? A little freaked out, Thanatos handed over the chains, at which point Sisyphus smiled. A few minutes later, Thanatos was bound in chains, gagged, and thrust inside a large chest. Sisyphus closed the lid on the chest tight before getting back to that living thing he enjoyed so much. The problem was, everything kept living. Old people would breathe their last breath, only to keep on breathing. Men would impale their foes in battle, only for them to rise up and come at them again and again. Dinner would stare up at you accusingly from the plate. It was not a good time for anyone involved, particularly for Ares. Ares was having none of it. He was the god of war. Fuck you, Kratos. And war was just not fun anymore without anyone dying. He went on a murderless rampage all throughout Greece looking for Thanatos, till finally he found him bound and gagged, and after Thanatos assured him it was not a weird sex thing, he released him from bondage, and Thanatos went off to try and find Sisyphus. Now, sensing that death was literally fast approaching, Sisyphus told his wife that if he died, she was not to give him the usual funerary rites befitting of a king. She was instead to strip his corpse naked and throw it out onto the street. Never one to argue, he agreed. And after Thanatos dragged Sisyphus off to Hades, as instructed, he carefully undressed the body and then unceremoniously flung him out the door. And down in Hades, Persephone found Sisyphus mowing beside the river Styx. She asked him what was wrong, and he let out a sigh. No, it's nothing. It's just my life. I thought we had it all, you know? We were king and queen of a city. We had 5 great kids, an amazing water feature. I thought we had a happy marriage. But now, when I went to check on her to see how she was getting on after my untimely demise, I found she hadn't even bothered to give me a proper funeral. Instead, she just chucked me out onto the street with the dogs. I just keep asking myself, what went wrong? How could things have gotten so bad without me realizing? Did she not talk, or did I not listen? Persephone, who was no stranger to marital issues, was moved by Sisyphus' plight and organized for him to return up to the world of the living for 3 days to sort out his marriage and hopefully get himself a proper funeral. Just 3 days, mind you, she said as she waved Sisyphus off, holding back a snarling Cerberus. Sisyphus smiled back at her. Eventually, a lot more than 3 days later, Sisyphus' absence was noticed. And at this point, the gods were taking no chances. They got Hermes, the only competent member of the Olympians, to go off and find Sisyphus. And find him he did. He guided his soul all the way down to the depths of Tartarus, where Zeus, Hades, Ares, and of course Thanatos were all waiting for him, all with big smiles on their faces. They told Thanatos that they wouldn't hold him here indefinitely. He could actually go back to the realm of the living, provided he could accomplish one task. They then pointed to a massive, massive boulder. They told him that if he could roll that boulder all the way up the steep hill in front of him, then he would be allowed to return to life. Sisyphus got to work. He pushed, he heaved, he strained, barely moving an inch with each titanic effort he put in, but slowly and surely it crawled along, going up the hill bit by bit by bit. And what seemed to him like weeks later, he'd finally gotten that boulder to the very top. Just as he pushed it over the edge to land on the top, it wobbled and rolled right back down, thundering all the way to the bottom below. Defeated, he sighed and went back down to the bottom and tried to push it up again. Same result. Every time, just as he was about to mount the mountain, the boulder would tumble back down to the ground below. That was his punishment. From that time until the last, Sisyphus will be pushing that boulder, attempting to bring it up to the top of the mountain, which will never happen, because he can't outrun death. And that's the end.
Ooh. I mean, he's a horrible person, but I do kind of like his style.
Yeah.
You like Sisyphus?
He seems kind of like Badman Jack, but on a bigger scale.
On a more murderous, incestuous scale, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing. If you look away from the whole sleeping with his niece and killing people all the time, he's not a bad guy.
If you look away from the bad things he did, he's not that bad.
Yeah, I know.
He didn't mean it. It was only a little bit of murder.
And he's one of the few people keeping landscape gardeners in business at the moment.
Right.
Yeah. So I have another story about somebody ending up in the underworld, but it comes from the other side of the globe. Well, not the other side, but like you go vertically upwards and a bit to the left. So it's a Norse story. Yes, exactly like that, Emily. It's the story of the death of Balder. Now, Balder was Odin's son. He was his favorite son, and, well, you couldn't blame Odin for that. Everyone loved Balder. They say that when he shined and when he smiled, it was like the sun shining right at you. But Balder had every reason for happiness in the world. He had the love of all living things and all things not living as well. He had a lovely wife called Nana, or Nana. I think it's some. I'm gonna go with Nana, okay? And he had 2 lovely children. He had all the reason to be happy in the world, but he was plagued by nightmares. Now, these aren't your normal sort of nightmares, like you're in front of the classroom and suddenly you're wearing no clothes, or you're running away from some terrible creature and suddenly your feet are glued. No, these nightmares were apocalyptic. He saw everyone and everything burning. He saw the dead rising again, and he saw a great wolf eat the world. He told his father, Odin, about the nightmares. Odin, he usually kept his own counsel, but he shared this with his wife, Frigg. Now, Frigg, of course, loved Balder. Everyone did. He was a great guy, this Balder. So Frigg, she thought to herself, she can't let these horrible things come to pass. So she'll make sure that Balder can't die. What Frigg did is she went out into the world and she asked everything, literally everything, to not harm Balder. She asked, well, all of the peoples, the dwarves, the elves, the frost giants, and of course they loved him, so they wouldn't hurt him. She asked the grass, she asked the trees, she asked rock, she asked steel. None of them would harm Balder. They promised her they wouldn't. There was one thing she didn't ask. That was mistletoe. Mistletoe, it's a tiny little scraggly thing, grows out of trees, and Frigg thought, no, mistletoe couldn't hurt anyone. It's too small, too spindly, too innocent. So she didn't bother to ask mistletoe not to hurt Balder. When she returned to Valhalla, she told Balder what she had done, and Balder told everyone, and everyone was delighted, and then they decided to test it out. First thing they did was they gathered all of the warriors. They gathered Thor, they gathered Tyr, and, well, they started chucking swords at him. And the swords would sway away from his body. Then they started chucking rocks. Same thing, they would turn to dust rather than hurt Balder. Thor even tried to hit him with Mjolnir, his hammer. What happened was some very strange looking dancing in front as Thor tried again and again and again to hit Balder, and Balder laughed and Thor laughed and everyone laughed. But there were two people who weren't laughing. The first was Loki, the trickster god. He didn't like this at all. The second was Hod, who was Balder's brother. The reason Hod wasn't laughing is because he was blind. Now, Balder usually tried to include Hod in everything, but Balder was so preoccupied with everyone else, he had forgotten to let Hod know that all of this was going on. So Hod was standing in a corner asking, what's going on? Why is everyone laughing? What? Where? Now, Hod, despite being blind, was one of the strongest of the Aesir, of the gods. And usually, Balder included him, no matter what. But Hod was getting a bit fed up. Why wasn't his brother asking him to join? Across the other side of the room, Frigg was happily laughing at all of the goings-on, and an old woman sidled up to her, an old woman that looked kind of familiar, but she couldn't quite place her. She said, oh, you've really done a good job here. Feature everything has kept Balder safe. And Frigg said, yes, everything. Steel would rather weep than cut him. Rocks would turn to dust rather than hit him. Is there anything that you didn't cover? Well, mistletoe. It's no harm in mistletoe. So, I was tired after walking all over the world and talking to everything. I just left mistletoe out. What could mistletoe do anyway? Right, said the old woman. And when Frigg turned to talk to her once more, she was gone. Loki, back in his usual form, went out into the world to find some mistletoe. He gathered a couple of sticks of it, a couple of leaves, a couple of berries, and he thought about how he might get this done. Thought maybe poisoning Balder with the berries. And that could work. But that didn't hurt enough people for Loki. Loki liked to go for the hurt rather than just the kill. So what he did is he got one tiny little stick of mistletoe and he sharpened it to a point so sharp that it could cut through breath itself. And then he went back to the hall where, of course, everyone was still having a grand old time trying to hit Balder and completely failing. And Loki went over to Hod, Balder's brother. He said, "No, I bet you wish you could join in this. I bet you wish you could be having as much fun as everyone else." And Hod said, "Yes, Loki, I do. I'm quite upset, really, of being left out." And Loki said, "Don't worry. I have something that will make you, well, the highlight of this whole affair." And Loki, he took Hod by the shoulders and he walked him over to the gathering crowd and pressed the little mistletoe dart into his hand. Loki whispered in Hod's ear, "Throw that as hard as you can at your brother's voice. Then everyone will laugh and he will be part of the festivities." And Hod, he didn't hesitate. He picked up the little dart and he threw it. And nobody laughed. Nobody cheered. And Hod, he cast about asking, "Well, why is nobody cheering? Why is nobody laughing? What's going on? I thought I could be part of the festivities." And Odin, he walked over to Hod. He said, "You have killed your brother, Hod. Balder is lying dead on the ground." Hod, he shook his head. He said, No, that can't be. It was only a tiny dart of mistletoe." And then Frigg began to weep. And then Thor began to weep. And then Odin began to weep. And everyone began to weep except for Loki, who began to snigger. The gods all came together and they decided that the world without Balder was like a world without sunshine. So they'd need to get Balder back somehow. Then Odin thought, Hel, Loki's daughter, who was, well, she ruled over Hel with a double L. He would go to her, but he didn't want to go to her himself, so he sent someone else. He sent Hermod, who was this tiny little guy, but very, very fast. He sent him down towards Hel. And as he sent him there, they began to make arrangements for Balder's funeral. They put his body on his ship. They tried to push the ship out to sea, but it wouldn't budge. They had to get 12 giants, 12 ice giants, to push this boat out into the sea, because before that, only Balder could have launched it. Put his body there, the body of his wife, who had died of a broken heart. They set it alight. Now Thor was really angry. Everyone from all over the world had gathered for Balder's funeral. And Thor, he wanted to fight something. He wanted to blame something. But there was no one to fight. There was no one to blame. There was no one to throw his hammer at. So what he did is he kicked a dwarf onto the boat and the dwarf died. That dwarf was named Lit. But anyway, when Hermod made his way to Hel, he crossed the bridge that all the dead must cross. Then he kept going downwards and north, downwards and north, downwards and north, until he came to the gates to Hel's kingdom. Rather than try to open the gates, because they would not open for the living, he jumped them, because he was riding Sleipnir, Odin's eight-legged horse, who, strangely enough, was also a child of Loki. Loki got around a bit. Downwards and northwards he went still, until he came to Hel's hall, and he came face to face with her. And he asked Hel to please, please let Balder come back to the world of the living, and Hel simply said, "The dead come to me. The dead never leave." But Hermod, he pleaded, he cried, and he said, "Everyone and everything in the world mourns Balder." Hel thought, everyone and everything. If you can make sure and come back to me and tell me that every single person and thing mourns Balder, then I will let him return to the land of the living. Hermod, he was delighted by this. He was like, "Yes, thank you, Hel. Brilliant, great." And off he went, upwards and south, back to the world of the living. And Hermod delivered this news to the gods, and they were delighted. So riders were sent out to ask everyone and everything if they mourned Balder. And they came back, and everyone and everything did mourn Balder. Bar one. One of the riders had found a giantess who lived in a dark cave in the mountains. They found her and asked, "Do you mourn for Balder?" And she said, "No, I don't mourn for Balder." "Have you shed one tear for his death? One single tear?" "No, not one." And so Balder remained in the land of the dead. And when Loki was no longer in his form as an ice giant, he laughed again, and laughed some more, and kept laughing. That's the end.
That's Loki being more of a prick than usual.
Yeah. He gets more of a prick the closer you get to Ragnarok. Baldur's death is like the kind of prequel just about to Ragnarok.
Yeah, as it progresses, God of Mischief becomes more and more of an inadequate description.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More God of being a complete and awful dick.
Right, so we've had two stories about death. So I'm going to tell a story that's not about death, but is about something close to death: old age. Once upon a time, in a place that was not exactly Italy, but rather similar, there was a king. And this king had a particular appetite. He needed to have new. He couldn't wear the same pair of shoes twice, the same pair of clothes twice. He couldn't eat the same meal 2 nights running. And he couldn't sleep with the same person for more than about a week or so. And he was in a particularly bad mood because, well, he'd literally done everything. He'd sung every song, he'd eaten every meal, he'd tried every fashion trend, and he'd fucked everything with a pulse. Yes, this is a dirtier version than the one I normally tell of this story. I don't swear much, but when I do, I like the expression on Siobhan's face. The king was in a particularly foul mood as he stormed through the streets of his city, thinking that there was nothing and no one in the world that he had not already experienced. But then he heard something. A sound. A voice. A female voice. And it was singing. And it was singing a song he didn't know. He followed the voice. It was so sweet, so beautiful. He began to form an image in his mind of what the owner of that voice must look like. She must certainly be beautiful. She would probably have smooth skin, perky breasts, a slender waist, powerful thighs. And he became so enraptured with this image that he was in love with it by the time he found the house that contained the voice. He banged on the door, screaming, "Principessa Bella, I am in love with you." Now, the king didn't know that there was not a young maiden living in this house. There were two women in this house, two very old women. Time had not been kind to these women. Their backs were bent. They had arthritis in every joint. They had more wrinkles than you could count. But for some reason, though time had taken away almost everything, it had left the voice of the elder, and it was she who had been singing. When they heard the king outside banging on the doors, demanding that the young, beautiful woman of the house who had been singing come out to him, well, the sisters were thrown into a panic. What would happen when the king saw them? He would think that they were witches. They would be burnt. The elder of the sister called out in her sweet voice, "Oh, my lord, I would of course come out to you, but alas, I am such a modest maiden that if I were to come out and you were to look on me with all of your love, well, I would just blush so hard that I would burst into flames. I'm afraid I can't come out to you." The king, though, was not to be put off by this. He begged, he pleaded. He began to send treasures, jewels, silks, spices, gifts of every kind were sent to the house. And as the old women had no pension, because the king didn't really care about looking after his subjects too much, they accepted the gifts. But still, the old woman claimed that she could not come out. Her maidenly modesty would not allow it. The king, though, became more and more enraptured. The more she said no, the more he wanted her. At last, he knelt by the doors, crying out, "Darling, please, let me see some of you, just the tip of your finger. If I do not see the tip of your finger, I will die." Now the two old women began to wonder, could you be convicted for regicide if the king did actually die because of this? As it happened, though, the two old women made their living by making pesto. And whenever they made a batch of pesto, one sister would dip her finger into it and taste. And due to the preserving powers of olive oil, one of her fingers was still smooth and supple. So she took her finger, stuck it through the keyhole, and when the king saw the finger, oh, it was the most beautiful finger he'd ever seen. There was no finger that had ever been so wonderful. He knelt, he sniffed, he kissed, he licked it. Tasted like basil slightly. He said, "Oh, darling, now that I have seen your finger, I must hold you in my arms. If I cannot hold you in my arms, I will die." The old woman began to think fast. She couldn't kill the king. Oh, all right, my love. I will come to you, but only under some very certain conditions. After all, my maidenly modesty and all that. I will come to the palace, but only cover of night, and I shall wear a dark hood. And you must promise me that you will not open the window in the chamber we go into, and you will not light any candles. I shall, of course, lie in your arms, darling, but only in absolute darkness. The king, of course, agreed. He went to the castle and began to prepare the chamber. The sisters thought that, they had escaped that one. She could go to the palace that night, and hopefully all would be well. But then her sister thought of something. What if he puts his hand on your face? When he feels your skin, he'll feel how leathery it is. He'll feel the wrinkles, the nooks, the crannies. As soon as he touches you, he'll know you're an old woman. The two sisters began to think there had to be a way out of this. And the elder of the two, the one with the sweet voice, well, she had an idea. She told her sister to fetch string and rope, ribbons and a needle. She took her loose, leathery skin and began to pull it back, stretching it smooth. By the time she was finished, she looked like a corpse. Behind her was a great big knot of flesh that had been pulled and stretched, but at least she felt lovely and smooth. When this was done, when she was prepared, she put a dark cloak on, pulled the hood up, and went to the palace. The king welcomed his beloved into the dark chamber, and the two had a rapturous night of passion. In the morning, though, when the king woke up, satisfied, he felt he had to know what his beloved looked like. And yes, he promised not to open any windows or let any light in the chamber, but that was a promise he'd made yesterday. He went to the window, flung the curtains open wide, light fell into the room, and he turned to see his beloved lying naked on the bed, and he was horrified by the sight he saw. It looked like a living corpse. The skin was stretched tight over the bones. There was bunching at the back. She was an old woman. The hairs that still remained on her head were grey and wiry. He was horrified at the things he had done with this. He couldn't bear to think of it. He opened the window, picked up the old woman, and threw her from the castle, and then went about his day. As the old woman fell to the air, her loose skin became loose and began to flap about her, but it wasn't quite enough to stop her fall. She landed in a tree and became tangled in the branches. As it happened, this was a tree that was home to a number of fairies. And when they felt the collision, the fairies came out to see what it was. What they saw was a naked old woman, her bat wings tangled up in the branches, and they began to laugh. They'd never seen anything quite so funny in their lives. I'm guessing these fairies didn't get out much. The fairies laughed and laughed. They laughed until tears rolled down their cheeks, and they said, "Old woman, you have brought such joy to us that we're going to give you a gift." The fairies helped the woman down from the tree, and when her feet were placed on the ground, she found that the aches and pains were gone. Her back, which had been giving her hell for 20 years, was now straight and eased. She looked at her hands. She looked at her arms. She looked at her breasts. She was young. She was young and beautiful again. The king had gone for a walk to try to clear his head after what had befallen him. And as he was walking through the woods, he saw a sight, something that, now this was more like it, a beautiful woman, a beautiful young woman, a beautiful young naked woman. The king felt he was in love at first sight. He ran to the woman, knelt down before her and said, "Principessa Bella, oh, I am in love with you. Be my wife." And because he was the king, he got what he wanted. The two were married. And the new bride, the new queen, she asked that her elderly aunt be allowed to come and live in the palace. Little did the king know that this elderly woman was not his wife's aunt, but in fact, her younger sister. The younger sister was amazed, and every time they were alone, she would ask, "How did you do it? How did you become young again?" Of course, the old woman, who was now young, tried to put her off, saying, "I moisturized. Hydration is key. I went on a juice cleanse." But nothing she said would satisfy her sister, until one day, in frustration, she cried out, "I had myself flayed. There, are you happy? I had all of my old skin cut off me. Now will you leave me alone?" The old woman, who was still old, thought, "Ugh, I've heard of suffering to be beautiful, but that seems like a bit much." The king, though, had become curious about what his wife and his aunt-in-law were always whispering about, and he overheard this. You could flay off old age? Now the king, he had found that very morning a single grey hair. And he decided he was not going to grow old. He would become young. He would be flayed alive. He went to the chief of his palace guard and said, "I order you to flay me alive." And the guard said, This is a trick question, right? Nice one, Your Majesty. You nearly got me there. He wouldn't flay him alive. The king went to the chief cook. I order you to flay me alive. I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but all my knives have gone to be sharpened. I can't flay you alive. The king went up and down the palace asking everyone, but no one would do him the courtesy of flaying him alive. What was the point in having subjects if they couldn't even carry out a simple request? He wandered through the city, and still he could not find anyone willing to flay him alive. He offered gold, as much gold as they could carry, their weight in gold. And then he met someone, a stranger, who said, well, I mean, if that's what you really want, I'll flay you alive. Give me the gold and come with me into the woods. The stranger took the king into the woods, tied him to a tree, gave him a piece of leather to bite down on, and set to work. He slowly, methodically scraped the knife down, taking off the king's skin, flaying him alive bit by bit. The king, he bit down on the leather not to scream. This was a lot more painful than he'd anticipated, but, well, you had to suffer to be beautiful. He went through the agonizing experience. It was exfoliation taken to an extreme degree. And when it was finished, well, he felt like something had been taken off him. Maybe it was one of those things you had to wait a few days for the swelling to go down before you really noticed the difference. He made his way back to the castle, dripping and leaking all the way. When he came to the castle, he called out to his bride, "Honey, I'm home." The old woman who was young, who was now queen, took one look at the skinless, misshapen mess and had it thrown out the window, and ruled reasonably well.
Yay!
I mean,
Excellent.
I wasn't happy when I found my first grey hair, but didn't quite flay myself alive.
Yeah. I've been grey since I was 12.
I've skipped grey and have just started growing like stark white hairs here and there.
Nice.
And
Good
one of
luck.
the benefits of being ginger, we don't go grey, we just slowly fade to strawberry blonde.
All right.
Unfortunately, I've only got enough ginger in my jeans for my mustache.
So, in a stunning departure from form, I have a death story or a death-related story, and it's actually perfectly cheerful. There's no mutilation. There's no filth. There's you'll see. So, as maybe a surprise to some people and maybe less of a surprise to others, the King of the Dead lives in County Limerick. And the spot in Limerick where he lives is inside Knockfearna Hill. Now, the King of the Dead, his name is Dal. And he likes to ride a white horse. He rides across the night sky with the rest of his riders in a fashion oddly reminiscent of Odin. And that absolutely has nothing to do with how many Vikings settled in Munster. Nothing at all. There was a farmer, his name was Tom, and he was living near Knockfearna Hill. He had been doing quite well, him and his family, for a long while. But suddenly all their cattle took ill. Nearly all of them died. And they had to start selling their possessions just to make ends meet, and they had sold on all of their prized things except for one. Except for Tom's set of uilleann pipes. And he took them, and he was carrying them down to Limerick town itself. He was thinking he could play some music in a pub and make some money there that way. But as he was walking down the road, who should he see standing by a hedge but Down, the King of the Dead? And Down says to him, sure, it's yourself, Tom. It's yourself. Why don't you play me some music on those pipes there? I would love to hear it. This was the dead of winter. It was icy cold outside. And Tom says, oh, but my hands, they're frozen to the bone. I'd love to play some music, but I couldn't finger the pipes at all. So down, he takes Tom's hands in between his, as if to warm them. And he says, there now, I have given you the gift of music. You will be the finest piper in the country, and you will carry that gift until the day you die. Now listen, I have heard that you and your family have fallen on hard times. I've heard you've been having difficulty. So I want you to take this bag of gold as well. And here's what you'll do to pay me back. Later on this evening, just as the sun is going down, you'll meet me back here by this hedge, and you'll do me a favor, all right? Now go on home, take that gold, get yourself and your family a lovely meal, buy all your things back. So Tom takes the gold back to his family, and his wife especially is delighted. The pair of them go out, they buy all of their things back, they buy tons of food, they buy new wonderful things, and they come back home, they have a lovely dinner. And then Tom remembers his promise to Down. So he heads back down to that hedge, and sure enough, he finds Down there. And Down is sitting astride his huge white horse. And he has a troop of 30 riders with him, all of them riding these glorious war chargers. And Down says, now, Tom, here's what you're going to do for me. Me and my riders here, we're going off across the river. There's a castle over there, and there's a young woman in that castle. We're going to go kidnap her. But there's one problem. All the handles on the gate are iron. Not one of us can touch them. So we need you to open the gate for us. And Tom thinks to himself, well, this is a little bit morally questionable. But sure, I made a promise. I'll have to stick with it. I don't want to see what happens when you cross the king of the dead. So Down leads him to a horse, and it's not a big war charger like the others. It's an old cart horse. He gets up on its back, and Down says, now we're going to ride now, but listen. There is an enchantment upon your horse, an enchantment upon all these horses. You will not need to turn from an obstacle. You can ride straight through them. You could jump over the greatest valleys and rivers, but if you speak a word before we reach our destination, that enchantment will break. So remember to stay silent. So they all mount up on their horses and they ride up. And they're thundering along faster than Tom ever thought was possible to move on land. They ride through the trees, not just through the forests, but through the trees themselves. They jump huge valleys, and just as they were about to jump the River Shannon, Tom thinks to himself, oh no, there's no way. There's no way this horse can jump. But the cart horse, it bunches itself up, it springs forward and it leaps across the river. And as it touches the other side, Tom can't contain his excitement. He shouts, well done, me old cart horse. And then he finds himself not sitting on the back of the horse on the bank of the river, but standing in the road back beside the hedge. He realized he's just broken the enchantment on the horses. So he goes home. It's the only thing he can do. The next day, Tom is out walking. He's a little bit worried. He's thinking about what happened yesterday. And, oh no, what have I done? What have I done? But then he comes to that hedge again. And who does he see standing by the hedge but Down, the king of the dead? And Down sees him and he goes, oh, well, that was a disaster, wasn't it? Never mind. Look, take this bag of gold. You'll be grand. Head on home. Have a lovely meal. Meet me back here tomorrow evening. We'll sort it out. It'll be fine. So Tom, he's fairly surprised at how magnanimous the King of the Dead is. He heads home, he shares their gold with his wife, and she's amazed. She doesn't question where it comes from. She knows better than that. They live near the home of the King of the Dead. They live near too many fairies to question it. And so the next evening, Tom goes back down to the road, back to the hedge, and he sees down there, back up on his white horse with all of his riders behind him. And Down says, we're going to try again tonight, Tom. We're going to try again tonight. He leads him to a horse, and this time it's not some old cart horse. It's a great big war charger like the rest of them. Now remember, this time, don't say a word until we get there. And so they go riding across the landscape. They go through the trees, through the forests, over valleys, over rivers. And Tom remembers to keep his mouth shut. And finally, they reach the gate of the castle. So Tom, he reaches up, he pulls on the handle, opens the gate, and the riders all storm into the courtyard. And Down dismounts his horse, climbs up to a window, and there the young woman pokes her head out and climbs onto Down's shoulder. It seemed to Tom, this didn't seem an awful lot like a kidnapping. In fact, she seemed to be quite annoyed that they hadn't managed to do it the other night. But he didn't question it. He just got back on the back of his horse and he joined them as they rode back to Knockfearna. And he joined them as they rode inside the hill. And there Down and the young woman were married. And Tom was invited to join the wedding ceremony. And he loved it. There was music and song and feasting and dancing and stories. And when Tom was called upon to play a tune himself, he pulled out his pipes. And for the first time, he used that gift of music Down had blessed him with on their first meeting. And everyone loved every note he played. From Tom's perspective, this party had lasted about 3 days so far. And so he went up to Down and he said, thank you very much for inviting me. This has been wonderful. This has been amazing. You've been so generous to me. But my family, they must be worried. I'm going to head home. And Down says, your family thinks you're dead. You've been here for a year. Your wife is remarried. But look, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Here's another bag of gold. Head on home. Head on home. It'll be fine. It'll be grand. It'll sort itself out. So Tom, he heads home and he looks in the window and he can see that there is, in fact, another man sitting at his place in the table. So he goes inside. And at first his wife is terrified. She thinks a ghost has just walked in until he explains everything. He'd just been out riding with Down and gone to his wedding and had taken a year, which he thought was 3 days. And 3 days is also a long time to be away from home without explanation, but anyway. And the husband, the new husband, I mean, he took this rather well. And the priest sorted everything out. Sure look, Tom, you haven't died. So the old marriage, it still counts. That means the new one doesn't. It's fine, it's grand. And so Tom and his family, with all the money and all the gold gifted to them by Down, they did, as is unusual in an Irish story, and could only happen in one about the King of the Dead, live happily ever after.
That was lovely.
Sound. He's so sound.
It's like, that
Where
wasn't
other fairies,
great, was it? Let's try again.
other fairies will curse your skin to fall off piece by piece if you so much as tread one foot in their fairy hill. You have lunch on his fairy hill. He'll come up to you and go, hey, lads, just so you know, you're on me roof. Keep the noise down.
If you're
sound.
There was a story about 3 farmers who were working near, or 3 farmhands who were working on a field near Knockfearna, and one of them made a joke, sure, wouldn't it be great if Down brought us breakfast? And then immediately a woman comes out of the hill and brings them breakfast.
I've just got an idea of a show with Down and Anya running a B&B in Limerick.
Is this Anya of the ear? Is this Anya the bitey ear one?
Oh, I ship them. They're my one true pairing.
Haven't heard that
Speak
phrase
there.
in years.
Yeah. Flashback.
Another blast in the past. You've just lost the game. But as we were talking about
KCD inoculated me. I'm fine.
That's bullshit, and you know it. Speaking of death, despite the fact that Death is apparently from Limerick, Death's never been overly familiar with the geopolitical situation in Ireland. I just say this now to clear something up for later, because this starts, as a lot of good Irish stories do, with a birth. Man, woman did something happened a couple of weeks later. We can't know because it was Catholic Ireland. And then they had a baby. And I'm not sure if you guys know this, but I'm not sure if anyone else knows this, that having an unbaptized baby back in Ireland back in the day was like possessing weapons-grade plutonium. You wanted to get rid of that fast. So they had to organize the priest, arrange the christening, and the priest asked them if they had anyone to stand for the child. For those not familiar, including me before I was researching this story, stand means the person who's being named the godfather or godmother. This was Ireland, so it was going to be a godfather. And let's just say the man was a little bit picky. He started interviewing candidates in the local area. No one was good enough. So he extended it out to the whole county. No one. So he decided he was going to go for a walk until he found the perfect candidate to be his godfather, to be his child's godfather. As he's walking along, he sees this guy. He had long, flowing white robes, big, flowing white beard, skin of an indeterminate race. And he introduces himself. How are you? I'm God. And he goes, how are you, God? Fine evening. Yep, it's a lovely evening. What brings you out here, Tom? Well, I'm actually looking for a godfather from a child. Well, why didn't you say so, says God. I would be honoured to be your child's godfather. Will you f off, God, he says. I'm having none of that. I want someone who's fair to be my child's godfather. You think you're fair? Have you heard of periods? Have you heard of a hangover? Jesus, God. He lays into him for the next half an hour, undermining all of his creation. Till finally says, no, God, thank you very much, but you're not fair enough to be my child's godfather. Bye. And so Tom keeps walking until he runs into another man. This guy's finely dressed, black suit, red shirt, pointy tail. He goes, how are you? I'm the devil. He just keeps walking. Nah, you're even worse than the other guy. At least he's done some good. You're nothing but wrong. Keeps going and going and going. No, seems no one's going to do the job until standing beside the road, Tom sees a man dressed from head to toe in black, large scythe, and walks right up to him. I know who you are, he says. And who do you think I am? The black shape boomed back. Well, you're Death, aren't you? I am indeed. Tell you what, Death. Would you like to be my child's godfather? I know what you're thinking. Why would I want Death to be my child's godfather? But you're one of the only fair things in existence. You'll take rich and poor alike, man, woman. And Death agreed. Next day, he was there at the church, right beside the happy couple. And a couple of years passed until when the child had grown up and was of age, Death showed up and said that it was time for him to fulfill his godfatherly duties. He told the boy that it was his destiny to become the greatest physician the world had ever known. And so he gave him a gift. From that day on, the boy could tell when someone was about to die, because when he went to see them on their sickbed, if death was standing at the foot of the bed, they would be fine. And if death was standing at the head of the bed, they were going to die. Nothing the boy could do about it. And then death left him, leaving the poor boy a problem, because this was Ireland. Catholic emancipation was not for years. There was no chance that this boy could go and learn to become a natural doctor. No. So he had to start selling snake oil on the sidewalk. He was a charlatan. He went around trying to get people to try out his wacky cures, but no one paid much attention to the physician, apart from one guy. There was an old eccentric living in the area who had amassed a huge collection of strange and occult books and objects over the years, and he found that he'd become deathly ill. He was convinced that that normal medicine was going to do nothing for him. So he searched high and far until he found the physician. The physician went to see them, saw death standing at the end of the bed, and knew he was going to be fine. He gave him some couscous and told the man he'd be fine within the week. The week passed, he was right as rain, and the eccentric was so happy, he gave the physician a magic bag. He said that anything that you put inside the bag cannot get out, and command anything to go in the bag, it cannot refuse. So he puts the bag in his pocket like Chekhov's gun and heads off to his next case. After his first success, the news spread like wildfire. Everyone suddenly wanted to see the physician. Yes, occasionally there was nothing he could do for people, but he seemed to have an excellent success rate. Until one time, a princess called him. She said that she was dying, and she knew that the only person who could save her was the physician. He went along to her sick room, and he saw death standing at the head of the bed. Then an idea occurred to him. He told the servants to clear everything out of the room and to get 4 strong, strapping young men. The 4 men lifted up the bed and turned it, so that death was now standing at the foot of the bed. It worked. Death was very annoyed, but the princess lived. She was so happy. She married the physician at once, and he became Prince Doctor. Prince Doctor became even more famous with his new miracle cure of turning a bed 180 degrees. Suddenly, no one was dying wherever he went, which annoyed Death more and more. One time, before he made it in to see one of his patients, Death was waiting for him outside. He told his godson that this was no good. He'd have to stop, Death was going to do something about it. At which point, the boy opened the bag and told Death to get inside. Death hopped in, and the bag was closed. As I refer back to my earlier story, life without death isn't all it's cracked up to be, because everything still kept going. The sick were still sick. The dead were still dying. Old men and women continued to wrinkle and waste away. People would lie from bleeding in agony, wishing for it all to stop. Eventually, a whole committee was formed, and they begged the physician to release Death from the bag. And Death did so, and Death was released. The physician feared there would be some sort of reprisal, but no, Death just went back to their business, harvesting souls. And years passed, and years passed, and years passed, until finally, the physician died. Death came to collect him as he came to collect all, and stood at the head of the bed, and brought him to the next life. They entered a room filled with candles. Death took the man up to a candle and pointed to it. It was very small. There was barely a few millimeters of wax left, and the thing was flickering, almost about to go out. That is your candle, said Death. When that final light is extinguished, you will die and will never be able to return. But anybody pointed at all the other candles. If you take one of these candles and add its wax to yours, you will gain their life. So the boy wandered around, looking at the candles. Can you tell me whose is whose? He said. No, said Death. So he weighs it up, he goes around, he decides to go far away from his candle, as far as he can get. He reaches for a candle, and just as he's about to pick it up, Death blows out the original candle, and he slumps to the floor. As your father knew, he said, standing over the physician, I am the only fair thing in life. The end. It's got one of those fun Irish endings where it just decides it's over.
It's so wonderfully creepy, though, that ending bit. Yeah.
I'm very glad I changed my mind and told the Piper of Knockfearna, because I was going to tell that one.
I was going to do the Piper of Knockfearna last month.
Great minds.
So the next story I'm going to tell, it isn't really about death, but about something being alive that really shouldn't be alive. And it starts in the drawing room of a Mrs. Lambert. It's a little bit spooky, hence the lighting change. In the drawing room of Mrs. Lambert, there was a Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham was of medium height, build, weight, age, and means. He had been friends with Mrs. Lambert for many years. But this afternoon in the drawing room, Mrs. Lambert burst into tears. She said, "My son, Julius, I don't know what's happened to him. He's disappeared. He went to Rome 3 years ago and I haven't heard from him in 2 years." Mr. Graham was quite shocked by this. He didn't even know that Julius had gone away. Mrs. Lambert said, "You know Rome. You've studied in Rome, Mr. Graham. Would you go and look for my Julius?" Of course, Mr. Graham said yes. He travelled to Rome, but he soon got swept up in catching up with old friends, going to old haunts, and forgot all about his search for Julius. Until one day, he happened upon a man called Spencer. Now, this Spencer was an artist, and he had been lodging with Julius about 2 years prior. And the topic of Julius came up, and Mr. Graham remembered, "Oh, of course, I should look for Julius. Have you seen him?" And Spencer said, "No. He took all his money from the bank, and he ran away talking of a woman called Carnivorina." That's a strange name for a woman to have. "Yes, I know, but Julius had grown quite strange himself," replied Spencer. Mr. Graham resumed his search for Julius then, but though he searched the whole of Rome, top to bottom, he could not find any sign of Julius or where he had gone. So he gave up his search. But one morning, he took a notion to go out riding into the countryside. He took his horse and they kept riding all day until the late afternoon, going through fields until they became swamps, till the swamps became ruins, until, well, it really wasn't much of a place at all, full of mosquitoes and tumble-down huts. As he was about to turn around and head back for the day, he saw that's a house. It must be a house. It has the shape of a house, but it's so entangled in creepers and almost fall to ruin. But he was tired, and his horse was tired, and his horse needed feeding. He thought, well, maybe if I go there, they might give me some oats for my horse and maybe a flask of Chianti or two. So up to the house he went. He tied his horse at the front steps, and he was just about to knock on the door with his horse's whip when the door swung open, and a small man, almost emaciated, glared up at Mr. Graham. "Julius," said Mr. Graham, "where have you been? Is this where you've been for the past 2 years?" And Julius said, "Yes." "Hello, Mr. Graham. I didn't expect to see you here out in the middle of the countryside in Italy, where I thought no one would find me." But Julius, he beckoned Mr. Graham inside, and he said, "My man will look after your horse," and a small little servant scurried out, and then scurried down to the horse, and brought the horse around to some tumble-down stables. And Julius, he seemed to be nervous, twitching. He beckoned Mr. Graham inside. He said, "Oh, we should eat, we should have dinner." And well, there was a hearty stew served up by the servants, and Mr. Graham ate it. It was very good, flavoured with tomatoes and red peppers, but Julius seemed to not touch a bite. He kept twitching with a nervous energy. Mr. Graham asked, "Well, Julius, what have you been doing? What is going on here?" And Julius says, "No, nothing. Nothing has been happening." Well, Mr. Graham pressed on. He said, "Well, you're a young man of an inquiring mind and a scientific bent. Well, I can't believe that you've been doing nothing out here for the past 2 years." And Julius said, "Okay, well, I have been doing something." He stood up and he beckoned towards Mr. Graham. "Come on, come see." Till they got to a large greenhouse. Mr. Graham was about to walk in when Julius said, "No! Stay back." He opened the doors very carefully, swung them open. Then he took a big metal rod. Beside the metal rod was a large cauldron. Julius stabbed into the cauldron, and out of it came a large, raw, dripping piece of meat. And Julius carefully fed the rod into the greenhouse. And then Mr. Graham saw what lived inside. He heard a rustling, like the train of a dress across a ballroom floor, or like the gentle fluttering of butterflies on a moonlit night. What was making this sound was a great heaving plant. It seemed to have branches, no, not branches, more like tentacles, curling and curving around the greenhouse. And at the end of these tentacles, well, it couldn't be. It seemed to be like a human eye with a lid, opening and shutting and opening and shutting. The susurrus from the tentacles grew louder and louder. They tangled around the meat and pulled it into the center of the plant. Great cracking and gnashing was heard. And Julius giggled. "Do you like her? That's my Carnivorina. I've studied Darwin and Wilder, all of the greats. I have seen plants like the Venus flytrap, like of which I hadn't even conceived. Pitcher plants, they consume flesh, not just other plants. And I thought there's an animal inside of these vegetables, and I want to bring the animal out. You see, my beauty, my Carnivorina, she has grown to such a great height. And the next stage, I believe, will be locomotion. She will gather her roots and step out from where she is. Mr. Graham was, of course, quite disturbed by all of this. He said, "Oh, well, but you're going to let this monster out on the world? Science doesn't see monsters," said Julius. "Science is only concerned with the possible." Mr. Graham, well, he left there as quickly as he could, and Julius called after him, "I will let you know of what will happen with my beauty." Mr. Graham went back to Rome, and well, several months passed with no word from Julius, until a letter arrived. A letter with only one sentence. "I have done it. Come and see. Bear witness." Signed, Julius Lambert. Mr. Graham, afraid of what he might find, but feeling a need to go anyway, well, he travelled out to the house that Julius had shared with Carnivorina. When he got there, there were no servants this time. The door swung wide open. Mr. Graham carefully walked inside. There was no sign of anything here. He walked with great trepidation towards where the greenhouse was. He peered inside. The doors were wide open. And he saw Julius. Not all of Julius, mind you. Just his head, with wide, glaring eyes, held in a vice grip, right in the center of Carnivorina. Her tentacles holding him in place like a trophy. Carnivorina stirred then. And Mr. Graham, running as fast as he could and drawing the revolver that he always kept on him at all times, being a sensible man, turned, and he saw that Carnivorina had extracted herself from where she was planted and was following after him with the eyes of Julius staring straight at him. Mr. Graham thought, and he thought quick. Instead of running away from Carnivorina, he ran as fast as he could straight to the heart of the plant. And he shot his revolver. Carnivorina's tentacles, they shot out straight and then dropped to the floor. The creature was dead. The head of Julius rolled across the floor. Mr. Graham, he extricated himself from the tangled remains of the beast. And then he searched the house top to bottom, gathering any pieces of writing, any research, any journals that Julius had. He threw them onto the body of Carnivorina, and he lit it on fire. Because a creature like that, though it could be made, it shouldn't. The world shouldn't have to see such a thing. That's it.
Wow. So, on the level of moral creators, do you think Julius goes above or below Dr. Victor Frankenstein?
Above, because he really loved Carnivorina.
Yeah, above, because he was at least taking responsibility for his actions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a good little story. Like I left out one or two bits, but Lucy H. Hooper wrote it.
Okay.
Right.
So,
I'm not familiar with it at all.
yeah, it's really, it's not very well known at all, but it's fantastic.
Did it inspire Little Shop of Horrors?
Possibly. I don't know. It's quite old as well. Like it's got a lot of like kind of very like I'm a man of modest means, therefore I shall go to Italy to spend my summer.
Hmm.
Like
As you do.
As you do. Ah, the times when we could travel.
Gap
Ugh.
years.
All around me
Outside.
are familiar faces.
I am meant to go next, but we only have 9 minutes left, and I think my story might be longer than 9 minutes. Stephen, do you think you can fit yours in 9 minutes?
Yes, actually.
Sorry, I may have taken too long with the
I know.
gory
I'll
description.
just go first next time.
All right. Okay. So this one isn't about death. People do die, so it's grand. So back in the day when the Vikings were raiding all over every coast of Ireland and a few inland bits as well, there was a few who had been raiding along the west coast, especially in the region around Leitrim and Donegal. At the end of their raiding season, they gathered up together and they started counting up all their gold and all their treasure and all their loot, preparing for the journey home, when they realized they'd been a little too successful this season. There wasn't room on the ship for all of it and for themselves. So they took some of the gold, some of the silver, and some of the jewels, and they piled them all into a chest. And they took the chest and they threw it into the bottom of Loch Finn, meaning to come back for it later. And of course, they did come back for it later. But it turns out they had overlooked one very tiny minor detail. You see, there was a paiste living in Loch Finn. So when they came back to recover the chest, well, let's say they didn't go home after that visit. And so the chest remained there at the bottom of Loch Finn for centuries. Two lads from Ballyheddy, they each had a dream one night. And in that dream, a voice told them that if they took 4 black stallions, and it had to be stallions, it couldn't be mares, with not a single hair of white on them, down to that lake, and took some good stout iron chains and hitched that chest up to the 4 black stallions, that they would be able to haul it out and take that Viking plunder for themselves. So the two of them, they would usually meet every day at a pub in Ballyheddy, and meeting the next day, they were both absolutely amazed when they each recounted an identical dream to the other. Taking this as not a coincidence, as some form of divine providence, they set out all over the country searching for 4 black stallions. And after days and weeks of searching, they could only find 3. So they decided to chance their arm on a single black mare as well. So they went to the lake with their 3 black stallions and 1 black mare and their stout iron chains. And they hitched the chains up to the horses, and they started driving the horses on, thrashing and whipping them, making them pull and haul. And the chest had started pulling out from the mud of the lake bed. But there was a reason why the dream had specified 4 black stallions. And truth be told, it should have specified further 4 black heterosexual stallions. You see, the 3 stallions, they each took a very particular kind of interest in the mare. And soon they started kicking and biting at each other and fighting over who would get to mount her. And these two lads, they weren't very experienced with horses. They didn't know what to do to fix this. And the mare, she was having none of it. She kicked all three of them, she broke her reins, and she ran off. And with all the noise and all the commotion, they woke the Paist of Loch Finn. And out it came, almost as long as the lake itself, with a huge horse's head on it, and a horse's mane going all down its back. And it emerged from the lake, whistling and shrieking, and it thrashed and it flailed around until it became tangled in the chains. And as it thrashed about trying to loose itself from the chains, the three black stallions that were still hitched to them, they got dragged into the water. And they drowned. But the Paist itself, it was still thrashing and flailing, and the chains snapped. The chest sank back into the lake. And the two men from Ballyheddy, well, they ran like fuck. Of course they would. They didn't want to be eaten by a fucking Paist like the Vikings were. So they were heading home back to Ballyheddy. And who should pass them on the road but a farmer in his cart. And his cart pulled by a single black stallion. Had they waited just one day more, they'd have had their treasure, which is still laying at the bottom of Loch Finn to this day, and can still be seen when the lake is clear and the sun is bright.
Now, just one question.
Yes.
If it's got the head of a horse and the mane of a horse, is it a kelpie rather than a paist?
I think it's usually a kelpie when it has legs.
Okay, it needs legs for it to be a kelpie.
Very important distinction there.
Their paist are very commonly described as having a horse's head. It's really strange.
Yeah,
I
I've
think-
seen those weird drawings of them. I can't remember what book they're from, but like it's a really incongruous horse head as well. It's like someone just copy and pasted another picture of a horse onto a snake.
I think the mane is just like, because a lot of the paist end up being eels. I think it's like an eel's fin.
Yeah.
Mm.
But yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Right.
The paste is real. Long live the paste.
Guys, I think this is the first live stream storytelling thing we've done where I haven't had to make the face.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
Yeah. You've disappointed me. Where was the filth?
Right, let's start talking about genitalia. Quickly. There we go.
Okay. People in the comments are talking about Victor Frankenstein. Victor was always talking about how he made his creature extra large. Like, made all of its pieces much bigger than normal because it would be easier to put together. His dick must have been enormous.
Like, did he make it working?
You know the
Probably.
phrase hung like a horse? Well, Victor Frankenstein kind of ran with that. It was literally a horse.
Victor was worried that if he made the creature a bride that they might breed, so presumably it did work.
Yeah. He understood the basic human nature.
I can't believe it didn't occur to him to just like make her without ovaries.
Yep.
Like
well,
if he was worried about them breeding.
But he was not a guy who did much thought.
No.
But also he was assuming that the bride would be, you know, up for it and decide, yeah, I want to be with Adam.
Oh, he did consider that and how that might make the problem worse. That might make the creature even more angry.
Or you'll just have two children. Also, it's kind of incestuous.
Kind of.
A little bit.
Does it count as incestuous if you're both made out of like 10 or 20 different people.
Well, if your
I
father
think
figure is the same,
Genetics
it's
would work.
Sorry?
Like if you had like the womb of one woman and then the ovaries of another and then the ovaries of another again and then the cervix of a fourth.
you
You
still
get a
have the
prize?
same father figure though.
See, that's the thing. I think it's
Yeah,
kind of like
but-
an adopted child, the step siblings growing up together. That, like, yeah, you might not be blood related, but it's still a bit weird.
Yeah.
Well, like,
That
let's
always
be
freaked
honest.
me out in Twilight.
Yeah.
Wasn't that was the family dynamic Victor was raised in? Like,
Yeah.
he
Yeah, I
had an
suppose.
adopted sister, and they were always told they'd be married.
Yeah, royalty.
Well, we've got suitably off topic.
Yay!
Right.
So, a lot of fill for next time is the message I am receiving.
Yeah, we need to be dirtier.
Right. We normally have said last Thursday of the month, but
Yeah.
last Thursday of December is Christmassy. What is
New
it?
Year's Eve.
New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
So we might not be doing it that day. We will work out when we're going to do it. Siobhan suggested
We'll let
sometime
people know
in
advance
the
of
no
time.
man's land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the forgotten days.
And we're also posting videos on the channel as well as the monthly live stream.
Mhm.
So hope you've enjoyed watching, listening, all that stuff. Anyone got anything they want to plug or say before we close off, or before it takes me 5 minutes to work out how to close it off?
I have a video going live tomorrow on my channel. It'll be the story I just told.
Yeah. And your channel is?
Hog and Dice.
And what's your channel, Emily?
I don't have a channel, but I have a podcast, which I was good at keeping it regularly updated, and then COVID happened. So I've got a podcast which you can hear Siobhan on. You can hear Nisha guested on. I need to get Stephen on it, called Sounds from the Shadows. So you can go find that where you get your podcasts. Siobhan, do you have a play coming up?
Nope, not at the moment. I'm just working on writing things at the moment, so nothing coming up because COVID and also stress. And also, I just finished my master's.
Yeah, finished and
Yay,
got a first.
congratulations.
Yeah.
I think you've earned yourself some time off, to be honest.
Yeah, I think so. Just gonna work my 9 to 5 Monday to Friday job and be one of those people.
Nisha, any parting words?
Parting words. Stay safe. Wear a fucking mask, for God's sake.
Wash your hands.
Wash your hands. If you're buying presents, get them off Amazon or at least online. I know we don't want to support the person who's probably going to be able to buy and own the world within a year, but don't be supporting people by going in person at the moment. That's my COVID rant for the moment. Be nice and don't be dicks to each other.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. I do have something to plug. I totally forgot about it.
Oh,
I'm going to be starting selling face masks online.
Oh,
Yay.
wonderful.
Oh, wonderful.
So I've got loads of new fabric in that I'm sewing up at the moment. And yeah, that should be happening within the next month. Definitely
fantastic.
before Christmas. Yeah.
Great. Because all of my face masks are going missing. It's like you know
They
the
do.
thing where the socks,
They're
where
like
one sock is
socks.
missing?
Yeah.
My face masks are doing that.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
I'm pretty sure they're unionizing and they don't want us to catch on.
Right.
More power to
Anti-capitalist
them, I
face
mean.
masks.
Right. So stay safe
Oh,
and goodbye.
just.
Oh.
Yep.